Cops of Reddit, what was your biggest, I truly am sorry I have to arrest you moment and why? I draw the blood for DWI arrests, so not a cop, but I was sitting in the assistant district attorney's office when an officer calls in and he stated that he felt horrible arresting this lady for drunk driving, even though she was plastered, because she was at her boyfriend's house and they all were drinking and the boyfriend's friend started trying to violate her and her boyfriend did nothing about it. So she hit the friend in the head and got in her car and fled from danger. Another driver called her into 911 for swerving. The lady drove 3 miles and made it to a gas station where she was found trying to call her friends on her phone for help. He felt bad that he had to bring her in, but the aider didn't accept any charges on her and the officer took her to her friend's house. 2 other officers went back to the boyfriend's house and they got arrested with existing warrants in the physical assault. Seeing that woman sitting in the jail for the few minutes she was there was heartbreaking. She was covered in scratches and her clothes were torn. I'm so glad they didn't charge her for fleeing being violated. Just happened. Not sure how the guy ended up here, but he had no phone, no family to call, wasn't welcome at the homeless shelter because he was caught drinking there. Very cold outside. Mental health evaluated him and kicked him free saying they couldn't help. Didn't have any vouchers or money to stay at a motel. He asked to go to jail. I warned him of trespassing at the police department for the next 24 hours. He refused to leave. Arrested for trespassing was the best worst option. As a probation agent, I was supervising Tim, early 20s, on probation for possession of narcotics. Tim lived in assisted living apartments due to severe mental health. Great person who just needed help learning more about his mental health. I received a report that Tim started to like one of the staff members, Stacy. She worked 3rd shift at their main house and often handed out medication. I talked to Tim about healthy boundaries between client and staff. Well, fast forward a couple days, Tim checked himself in the hospital because he tried to make a few advances with Stacy but it was denied. Stacy described it as scary as she was working in the main house and he followed her in a room and shut the door. Another staff member intervened. She then proceeds to make a report about other behaviors like he stares at her and tries to be around her. He was arrested and had a short-term jail hold, 4 days, and we placed a no contact. Fast forward a few weeks, I received another report from Stacy stating Tim continues to linger around the main building when she's there at night. The night before, she was on med duty and he went to pick up his medication. She asked him to leave multiple times but he never did. He continued to try to make advances towards her. Finally, a staff member walked in and told him to leave, which he then left. She feels extremely unsafe. I issue a warrant and go to his apartment. I am waiting for police to arrive and I ask him about that contact. He kept repeated. I shouldn't have listened to her, however, he wouldn't go in much depth. Police arrive and he goes to jail. I staff with my supervisor if we should revoke his probation as Tim is engaging in stalking behavior. I was finishing up my investigation and Tim adamantly denied Stacy ever telling him to leave that night. Finally, he breaks down and said they've been having a relationship for the past few months. Sure crap. Checked his Facebook account, and it is apparent they were dating. She assured him no one will find out. Arranging times to meet. Extremely flirty and sensual messages were sent between them. The B Stacy told me he was stalking her so she wouldn't lose her job. She reported the gestures as unwanted because other staff members caught them together. I was peeved that he went to jail, let alone we almost proceeded with revocation. I felt awful and apologized for the time he spent in jail. This was reported to the supervisor, but the fricking bee didn't lose her job. Anyone else would have their social work listened, revoked or face criminal charges. She just kept on working there. The county moved him to a different program. TLDR. Client was accused of stalking a staff member of his assisted living program. Turns out staff and client were in a relationship and staff made a false report so she wouldn't get fired. What the frick? It was Christmas Eve at a super fancy hotel downtown in my city. Lady drove her vehicle into a parking barrier and hotel security called it in. Got out there and she had her daughter in the car with her. Mom had recently bought her a Christmas puppy, a tiny little corgi. So anyways, I called for one of our DWI units to do the test because it's a felony for the child passenger. Mom fails and we have to handcuff her. She tried to run and my partner takes her to the ground as he falls slipping all in front of daughter and Christmas puppy. Mom goes to jail and I had to stay with the little girl until her aunt arrived. Learned dad walked out on them earlier in month and mom was having a tough time dealing with it. Mom needed to go to jail. She was drunk but I felt for her and her daughter. I enjoy that you also consider the Christmas puppy's perspective of seeing this lady falling and slipping. I'm no longer a cop but my first ever DUI arrest was a guy I went to a very small college with and we graduated together. I knew his family, his dog's name, we were friends. He was weaving all over both lanes and running onto the shoulder on both sides of the road. He cried and begged me to just let him go and he'd walk home and that he was sorry. He had to go to jail. Not a cop but a paramedic. Had a patient that was driving on a freeway at 100 km/h when she started having a seizure. A man also driving on the freeway noticed her slumped at the wheel so he sped up, pulled in front of her then used his car to slow hers down. I rock up, assess and go to transport the lady to hospital. Cops rock up as they do and find the man had warrants out for his arrest. Slightly awkward, but he had to leave his car on the freeway and go off to the cells. This is the kind of thing that would probably trouble me the most, when, of all things, a good deed is the reason for someone's past catching up with them. I've told this story here before but I used to live with a cop. She was called to a shoplifting incident and found a young, totally emaciated looking boy, couldn't have been older than 12, who the shopkeeper had pinched stealing some bare essential, a loaf of bread or a can of beans or something. She and her partner did everything they could to talk him out of pressing charges on the kid but the shopkeeper insisted and unfortunately her partner that day happened to be a superior or something and whether or not to follow through with the arrest was out of her hands. She had to take this crying, scared, starving boy to juvenile prison with teenagers who had committed real crimes. She did everything she could to ensure he got immediate social services attention and lobbied to keep the charges from appearing on his record at all. But she still felt broken having to do that to a kid who needed help. I'm not a cop, but I played one in a play in grade school. I was supposed to arrest someone after they confessed, but poor kid forgot his line, but I didn't. So it came off as I made up a burglary charge on the spot and hauled him off. I never felt more corrupt in my life. It haunts me to this day. Open and shut case Johnson. Not a cop, but the story fits. I was doing volunteer work with disadvantaged children in the community. It was basically an after-school program for kids who were from broken families and needed a supportive place to be. In talking with the supervisor, she explained how rough it is for some of the kids. On graduation day, most of the kids' parents will actually show up. The police know this and show up as well and use it as an opportunity to arrest any parents with outstanding warrants. So you're a 9-year-old whose parents are never in your life because they are deadbeats. It's supposed to be a happy day and mom and dad are actually there, but then they get hauled off in handcuffs. It just sucks all around. Not a cop. Also not me. This happened to some friends. My friend Jay is allergic to a lot of things, and accidentally ate something she was allergic to. Her parents called an ambulance, but it's a small town and it was already attending an accident so they rushed her up to the hospital themselves. Her dad was driving and was speeding and somehow managed to get pulled over by the one cop that wasn't attending the accident. Thankfully the officer realized pretty quickly what was going on. Apparently he was surprised my friend's dad pulled over at all given the circumstances. He couldn't allow her parents to speed the rest of the way, so he put Jay and her mum in his car and rushed her up to the hospital himself. Stayed there until he was sure she was okay. My friend's dad still got a ticket, but the cop also gave him some advice on how to dispute it given it was an emergency. I believe in the end he got off. I am a cop, but this one isn't my story. It's a buddy of mine. Woman calls 911 from hospital. Says she had been violated in our jurisdiction and was at the hospital awaiting an examination kit. Officer responds and begins preliminary investigation. He'd been talking to this woman for a couple hours when dispatch raised him on the radio. The dispatcher decided it was a good idea to run a warrant check on the woman and discovered she was wanted through Kentucky, not the state we worked in, with full extradition. meaning if she were found in any state in the county the state of KY wanted her shipped back to face their charges. I don't recall what it actually was that she was wanted for, but it wasn't for anything I'd consider major enough to warrant full extradition. At that point the officer didn't really have a choice taking her into custody. It was done so obviously after being treated and released from the hospital, but nonetheless that was a crappy moment despite the magnitude of whatever she did in Kentucky. 4 attorneys go golfing. While golfing, one accuses the other of being a cheat. Argument escalates until the accuser loses his crap and hits the dude with a gold club over the back, hard enough to leave a mark and snap the head off the golf club. Arrest the dude and he is just sobbing in the patrol unit about how he will lose his license and he is so far in debt with his school loans. The dude needed to be arrested, but you still had to feel empathy with him knowing he just drunkenly flushed his degree down the toilet. I read 4 attorneys go golfing and started waiting for the punchline. So I'm finishing up some preliminary paperwork in the Dollar General parking lot in reference to a shoplifting when I see a pickup go past me at a high rate of speed. I didn't have the opportunity to radar or pace it, but it was highway speeds in a 35. So I get on him after the 7 or 8 blocks to catch up. He turns into the cemetery. I activate lights and here we go. Get out. Signs of an obvious DUI. I begin standardized field sobriety tests when he starts bawling. Gotta play the nice guy. Tell him to take his time and collect himself. Well, he asks, through his tears, if we can move to a different area. This is an issue, because the cemetery isn't very flat and the area we were was more optimal than any other area nearby. Well, then I look behind him and see a tombstone with a familiar name. This guy was doing SFSTs in front of his dead mother. Within the past 2 years, this guy had his house burned down, his mother died, and his wife divorced. And I knew all of this. I didn't feel bad or guilty making the arrest. It definitely had to happen. However, I did feel for the person. I can only hope he's working to better himself now. This was about 4 months ago. I've heard a story from a police officer in Australia, where medicinal marijuana was not legal yet, having to arrest somebody for supplying marijuana oil to kids with cancer and severe epilepsy. There was a news article stating they felt like total pieces of crap because the guy they raided was a decent person trying to help a family friend with crippling illness and not actually selling the stuff to druggies. Even though it's legal now, it's so tremendously difficult to get. People still need to find other avenues to obtain it. There was also that dad in QLD that was arrested for giving oil to his kid with cancer. They put the kid into care. Kid lost a bunch of weight while in care because kid couldn't eat without oil to control the nausea. CPS blamed the weight loss on the parents and claimed neglect. Friend of mine who is a cop woke me at 3 in the morning to tell me this story. I completely understand why. I would be bawling my eyes out at making an arrest he did. He was called in to deal with a domestic dispute and arrested the woman because she beat the ever-loving crap out of the man. He told me he probably had a broken nose and wouldn't be shocked if he had vision problems one of his eyes for the rest of his life. My friend brought the woman in and she had some fresh marks as well. A couple cuts and a solid bruise on her arm. She also had a couple wounds that had clearly been there for a couple days and a couple that looked like they had just healed. My friend thinks that the man was abusing her for the longest time and she just snapped and defended herself. Thing is, my friend's mother was also abused by his father. So arresting who seemed to be the overall victim broke his heart. Other people may be calling bulls, but this exact thing happened to a close friend of mine. She was in jail for about 4 hours before someone noticed the bruises under her hairline and discovered she had a severe concussion and other damage. I'm not a cop, but there I started off all your comments for you. Don't forget the 1000 comments of I was the arrestee that are clearly bulls. Poor guy's wife died a year ago. Brain tumor. He's taking care of their 5-year-old son and he doesn't exactly speak the language of my country, and one day we are called because someone parked like an idiot. Well, he had picked up his kid from kindergarten with a 4.13 blood alcohol percentage. Didn't technically arrest him but stripped him off his child and driver's license. I hope you mean a .413. Obligatory not a cop, but friends and I were in a popular haunted cemetery in the area at night to get creeped out or whatever. Came out of the woods and a forest preserve cop scared the crap out of us by standing near the entrance in the dark, then turning on a flashlight as we approached. He brought us to his car to give us all FP curfew violation tickets and a lecture about people getting mugged in there at night. He gets to one of my friends and as he puts in his license info an alarm bell goes off. He quickly grabs my friend and puts him against the car and cuffs him. Turns out he had a warrant for missing court for a reckless driving ticket. FP cop was P. Our friend didn't tell him he had a warrant because A. the computer doesn't say what the warrant is for, or didn't at the time. So all they know at first is that they have to quickly arrest someone who may or may not be dangerous, and B. if he knew there was a warrant he wouldn't have run the license. They were just trying to keep kids out of the forest preserve at night, not arrest people for traffic court violations. I always ask my buds before a road trip if they have any outstanding warrants. Not a cop, but I was arrested for revenge P after my abusive ex-boyfriend made a false complaint. I had to wait 7 hours in a cell before I was told there was no evidence, and another 2 before they let me go. As I was being led out, the officer accompanying me said she recommended I file a complaint or sue them as there was no reason for them to have arrested me at all. Not a cop but a prosecutor. I was in law school working as a prosecutor for my summer job under the supervision of an assistant. I'm getting ready for my first trial of the summer. It's a fairly bad one. This guy was drunk and lit a random car on fire. The fire spread to the house because it was under a connected structure. An elderly man was inside and barely escaped and is messed up from smoke inhalation. So it's my first week in the office, but my second summer, so I'm comfortable just stepping in and doing the work. My job is going to be jury selection and nothing else to get me back in the groove. In walks the defendant through the jail door into the courtroom, shackled at the wrists and ankle. I instantly recognize him. It's a guy who I used to work with, had some classes with, who was constantly trying to convince my college girlfriend to date him instead of me. I told my boss I needed to recuse myself from the case, but I stuck around and watched him get convicted. Ended up talking my boss into a lighter sentence recommendation though by vouching for his character potential before he became an alcoholic. Ended up recommending and getting jail time plus rehab. I assume he's out by now. I got a call to a barber shop at like 4 AM for a woman outside who wanted her boyfriend, who she stated was on the inside, to give her her house key back. She initially told me that she had no way to get into her house because her boyfriend, now ex, had the key and so she needed it back. She also decided it was a good time to tell me he had a felony warrant. I ran him and sure enough he had one. I felt bad for her so I started to pound on the front door of this barber shop. I knew he probably wasn't going to answer so I yelled something about if he didn't open up I would report the barbershop to our problem properties unit for having someone sleeping overnight in the business. Sure enough he comes to the door and opens it up. I immediately recognize him as a janitor at one of the grocery stores I frequented while working midnights, as it was the only thing open to get food. He was always really cool with me and seemed like a really hard-working guy. He explains to me he has no key of hers and the only reason she is there is because she knows he has a warrant and she just wants him to go to jail. He said he planned on turning himself in soon but just wanted to get some things straightened out first with his kids. Unfortunately I had already run his information on my car computer so I had no choice but to arrest him for the warrant. I felt so terrible but he was very understanding. I sit him in my patrol car and while another officer watches him I go and speak with her again. I tell her I wasn't able to get a key so she would have to find another way to get inside the house. She tells me that's okay, she has a spare key. I ask her for her information now and go run her and I'm praying to whatever God is out there that she also has any type of warrant as I was going to arrest her too. But she does not and she gets to go on her merry way. On the way down to intake I ask the guy why he had to come to the door. Said it was his friend's barbershop and he didn't want him to get in trouble over his drama. I felt so bad because I had to tell him I was just bluffing and none of that would have happened. Still feel terrible to this day. There was a couple that lived in my district that I knew from outside of work. I happened to know the man had cheated on his wife and was all around a smarmy bastard. The wife was a respected member of the community with a prominent job. The couple also had a young son and were members of the local church. One day, a domestic disturbance gets called out at their residence. Dude was being in butt and got into an argument with her. She gets frustrated enough that she punches him in the face and he calls 911. He says he doesn't want to press charges, just wants us to separate everyone and keep the peace. Wife does what every good Christian is raised to do, and tells the truth. Our state has a mandatory arrest law if probable cause is found for any domestic violence crime. Unfortunately, that meant we had to take this sweet, otherwise law-abiding lady to jail. At least the bad guys have the good sense to lie to us. Not a cop, but a former host translator for a cruise liner, once had to translate for our security officer as he expelled a French gay couple from the ship for beating a German woman up for reserving chairs at an empty lounge. It had a sign telling people not to reserve seats. The one thing they don't tell you when you get hired as a translator: people get mad at you, not the guy who's giving the actual orders. I've never heard so much cursing in French as I did that day. I recently arrested a firefighter for DUI. He'll likely lose his job over one mistake, albeit a stupid and inexcusable mistake. I felt bad for him. You have been visited by the happy baby pygmy murder cow. Back away slowly and subscribe quickly to ensure your safety. Thanks for watching. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.